So here's a different kind of quadratic. This actually has a shortcut, but I'm going to show you the long way. So remember, standard form for a quadratic is ax squared plus bx plus c. So if I were to line this up with the corresponding locations, so my y squared goes under the x squared column, and my number, that negative goes with the number, goes under here. So I do not have any simply just y's, which would go under here. So if I have none, that's a plus 0x. So I'm going to rewrite this to be 9y squared, excuse me, that should have been a y, plus 0y minus 36. So now this looks in standard form. So I'm going to ask myself, do I have a greatest common factor? And the answer is yes. The answer is 9. So that means I can divide out a 9 from all terms. So then that gives me 9 times y squared plus 0y minus 4. So now the only thing that I'm going to work on is this here in the middle. So I'm going to highlight this 9 because I have to remember to put that 9 back in my problem at the very end. So now I'm just going to look at this. This is the only thing I care about factoring. I already took out the greatest common factor, so I'm just going to go to my x. The last and the first multiply together, negative 4y squared, and my center is 0y. So that means that if I do negative 2y and 2y, this times this gives me the top, this plus this gives me the bottom. So remember, the whole purpose of doing this is to replace the center. So since I'm just working on the center part, I'm going to ignore these parentheses because otherwise I'll get confused. So y squared minus 2y plus 2y minus 4. So remember, this minus 2y and plus 2y is replacing the center. So now I'm going to group it into two parts. What's a common factor in the first part? Y and y. So that divides outside to y, and then I'm left with y squared divided by y, which is y, negative 2y divided by y, which is negative 2. So now I'm going to look at this part. What can I divide out? I can take out a plus 2 from each. So that means I have a plus 2. So when I divide by 2, I get 2 divided by 2 is 1 times y is y. And then negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. So we can see what's inside the parentheses is exactly the same. That means that both of these parts have the same number factor, y minus 2. So that means I can divide out the y minus 2. And again, I have y minus 2 divided by y minus 2, same number on the top and the bottom. Those divide out to 1. So I'm left with y plus 2. And I don't want to forget that little 9. That 9 has to come back down. So those are my factors. Now, after having done this, I want to do something that might be a little intimidating, but it's really the same type of thing. So let's look at this problem. You can see that this was similar to the one we did on the previous page. The one we did on the previous page was 9y squared minus 36. So we know that this here is a perfect square, and this here was a perfect square. Well, x to the fourth is also a perfect square, 81 is a perfect square, and y to the fourth is a perfect square. So we can do a very similar thing to what we did on the other side. So when I rewrite this, I know it's going to be x to the fourth plus 0 something, I'm not sure what that is, minus 81 y to the fourth. I don't have a greatest common factor like I did in this one. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to my setup. I'm going to multiply my first to my last, so that gives me negative 81 x to the fourth, y to the fourth. And I know my middle term is 0 something. We're going to get that something when I do my factors of my variables. So I know that my factors of x to the fourth is x squared times x squared. So I know that this has to have an x squared and this has to have an x squared. And my factors of y to the fourth is also y squared times y squared. So I can put those in there. So I know this is going to be x squared y squared, which means this is going to be x squared y squared. Another way to look at that is half of 4 is 2, so my middle term has to be x squared, and the same thing with my y. Okay, so now I'm going to look for my factors of negative 81 that add up to 0, and I know that it's going to be 9 and negative 9. So 9 times negative 9 gives me negative 81. 9 plus negative 9 gives me 0. So again, just like in the other one, if you notice, the pattern for all of these is the same. There's no change in pattern. That's what math is all about, patterns. So this is going to be x to the fourth plus 9x squared y squared minus 9x squared y squared minus 81y to the fourth. So remember, this is what I was using that this x thing for over here, was to get that to replace my center term. Now I'm going to split this into two parts. Common factor between x to the fourth and 9x squared y squared is x squared. So I can divide out an x squared. What does that leave me with? That leaves me x fourth divided by x squared gives me x squared plus 9. This divides out to 1, so that gives me plus 9y squared. Let's look on this side. Because my first term is negative, I know I'm going to divide out a negative. Common factor between 9 and 81 is 9. Common factor between x squared y squared and y to the fourth is y squared. So that means I'm taking out a negative 9y squared. So now I divide. Well, negative 9 divided by negative 9 is 1. Y squared divided by y squared is 1. So I'm left with x squared. Negative divided by negative is a positive. 81 divided by 9 is 9. Y to the fourth divided by y squared is y squared. So again, notice that what's inside my parentheses is exactly the same. That's important. If I don't get that, it means I made a mistake. So now I can divide out x squared plus 9y squared from both terms. That comes out. And then that means that this divides out to 1. This divides out to 1. And so I then am left with x squared minus 9y squared. However, I am not done. This is prime because it's the sum of squares, but because this is a difference of squares, I can factor. So I can go through that whole process again, or for the sake of time, I'm going to show you the difference of squares shortcut. Okay, so if I take the square root of x squared, I get x. If I take the square root of 9y squared, I get 3y. So that means that this pink thing becomes x plus 3y, x minus 3y. You can see where I got my x and my 3y from. I took the square root of this, that's the first term. I took the square root of that, that's the second term, and I have to have a plus or minus. Do not forget your sum of squares, which is prime. So this whole thing right here is your factor of this.